Chapter 37, soil and plant nutrition. So, right here we've got a carnivorous plant, right? Pitcher plant, right? Little kid, look at how ginormous they are. So, what you're gonna find out is carnivorous plants are actually found in areas where the soil is actually very poor in certain types of nutrition. So the plants have evolved to actually suck up excess nutrients, by eating something else than just making their own food through photosynthesis. So that's where the carnivorous plants came into play. It's kind of cool. All right. So soil contains obviously a very living, complex ecosystem. Texture is all going to depend on the particle size. So you've got clay, that's the smallest, sand, and gravel, right? As we go up. Now, gravel's great, nice and thick, but water is going to go straight through it, so you don't want to have nothing but gravel. Clay, the particle size is so small, it's going to be very compact, so compact that it doesn't allow any water through, which is not good because then it's just going to hold all the water in it and the plants are going to suffocate. So you actually want a mixture of a little bit of everything to have enough water being held without too much water being held at the same time. And for the roots themselves to be able to have, with their root caps, remember, root cap, the tip, right, so it can pierce through, get to the pockets of water and the pockets of nutrients. It's going to be able to go through and get to what it wants. So you want that combination of all the above. Humus, not hummus. Humus, remains of dead organic and other organic matter. Specific type of soil, very, very important because that's really the main part of your nutrient-rich soil. All right, super, super important. And you've got this nice little pyramid that shows you the mixture of everything and clay, silt, sand, mixture of all of it together. It's kind of cool. I like that little chart. You know how I am with my charts. All right, topsoil. What a lot of our subdivisions have unfortunately been missing, hence why our grass doesn't grow. Mixture of humus, living organisms, and mineral particles released by weathering. It can be anywhere from a few millimeters to meters deep, right? So feet deep. Loams, most fertile soil, combination of equal parts of sand, silt, and clay. It's going to be good holding of water, but not too much at the same time. Sandy soil does not hold water, something we're very familiar with around here. Clay soil holds too much, and oxygen is completely absent because it just suffocates it. There's no way for the oxygen absorption to occur. Topsoil composition has both inorganic and organic components. So you really see a nice oxygen rich, right? You see it changing through the deeper you go. If you ever get a chance to really start digging in your soil, and I don't know about you guys, but we've, especially lately, have been noticing that as we've been digging our yard, we've seen that the soil in our yard has actually changed since when we first moved in 15 years ago. It's actually starting to get a deeper, richer, more of a topsoil appearance. That's telling us that somehow we've had some kind of, and our guess is clover because we've got some clover that snuck in. We didn't intentionally have it. It's starting to add nutrients back into the soil, turning our sandy soil into more of a topsoil situation, which is what we want. That's what you want. So the more of that topsoil you have, better chance you have a grass actually growing and being healthy. That's why a lot of people, if they're replacing their sod year after year, if they're not adding new topsoil, that sod is not going to survive. It's just not going to have the nutrients it needs. It really has to have the topsoil with it. And unfortunately, in order to add enough topsoil to go with the lawn, the sod, you're basically doubling the price of the sod. So to have your lawn, whatever the sod price is, double it to have enough topsoil if that's the issue with your lawn. So something to keep in mind for your folks. Or for yourselves, depending on the situation. Soil particles are negatively charged, so cations will adhere to them because remember, opposites attract. And they're not easily lost by leaching, right? Being sucked out by the water through the soil. So that's your potassium, your calcium, and your magnesium. They're doing great. Roots can directly absorb mineral cations from soil particles. We talked about that in the previous chapter. So there's a cation exchange. That's where the cations are displaced from soil particles by other cations. Typically, oh, look at that, hydrogen ions. Oh, look at that, what's that? Co-transport keeps coming back. That itty bitty little proton, which is what a hydrogen ion is, a proton. He's able to allow all this exchange to occur, just a little proton. I love co-transport, you know this. Anions. Anions, however, can be leached. That's your nitrates, your phosphates. Hence why we have to add fertilizer to our lawns, to our soil, to our bushes, to our help me out, flowers, everything, right? Because they're constantly being leached, all right? Because you've got the positive charge in the soil particles sucking them right out of the actual roots of the plants. So that's why we have to keep adding them so the plants keep getting it back. Cool? Good? Major component of soil is humus. It's decomposed. It's a decomposition of dead organisms, fecal matter, fallen leaves, any kind of other organic material, and that's decomposed by bacteria and fungi. 1 teaspoon of topsoil can hold 5 billion bacteria that live with fungi, algae, and other protists, insects, earthworms, nematodes, like a roundworm. There's a microscope picture of a roundworm, and plant roots. So my softball players, my baseball players, and anybody who's ever been told to grab some dirt and rub it into your open wound so it won't bleed anymore, don't do it. That right there is why. 5 billion in 1 teaspoon. Don't do it. Please. I know it's to get you to still play, but don't do it. All right, soil management. Truly, before we really started farming, we were nomads. When we as a society, as a human race, started figuring out, hey, look, if we stop and stay in one spot and we actually grow our plants and we actually take care of our cattle, we can actually stop moving around and chasing food and we can just grow it here. That really is what led to our modern societies. When we mismanaged it though, that's what led to the Dust Bowl. You see this picture right here, these are homes, like so 1-story homes. That is how high the Dust Bowl cloud was. That right there is what happens when we don't control grazing, when we don't control the farming, when we don't control invasive species. That right there, that picture speaks 1,000 words, if not more. So Southwest Great Plains were grazed by cattle, overfarmed for wheat. Cattle coming in, pulling the native plants. There was a drought that lasted for years. There was another key part to it, and Mother Nature had her own part to the Dust Bowl. All that came all together. Soil was eroded incredibly easily, and the Dust Bowl we had. So something to keep in mind at the importance of proper soil management, proper maintenance of soil, and maintenance of our cattle. All right, not allowing it to overgraze. So all of this comes together: the environment, life on Earth, ecological, economic, social, everything put together. Woo-hoo, halfway through the chapter. Irrigation. Irrigation accounts for 75% of our freshwater use. I'm gonna say that again. Irrigation. That is sprinklers. Not washing, not showers, not washing clothes, not running the bath. Sprinklers. Running water for lawns, running water for trees. Now, in all fairness, crop growth, that's part of it too, okay? That's 75% of our freshwater use globally. Now, keep in mind, 75%, 70 to 75, depending on who you talk to, of the planet is water. Of the 75%, roughly, 3% is fresh. Of the 3% that is fresh, 1% is in liquid form. So that 1% we actually have in liquid form, right, because the other 2 are frozen. North Pole, South Pole. North Pole, the Antarctic one was getting thicker. Now it's starting to shrink a little bit. The Arctic one, though, is definitely getting smaller. There's a new study that's showing the Antarctic is getting smaller as well. So now they're both getting smaller. That 1% that we have in liquid form, 3/4 of it is being used for irrigation. And here's the next problem. Our primary source of that is our aquifers. So right underneath our feet, right? Just like we have in Florida. And when we overuse it, it's like we talked about before, so we think about a sponge. You take a sponge, you leave it out for too long, it starts to dry out. And as it starts to dry out, it shrinks, it gets smaller. That's what's happening. So you have the soil right here, you got the aquifer right here. Blue, blue, blue. I want blue for water. All right, it's gonna be dark blue. And we have the water that flows around it. Yes, I know it's slightly purple. Leave me alone. All right. Then we put a well in here. We put a well, and we start getting the water out to use used for irrigation. So the water level goes down. Well, we have the deeper water. So second water from down here. Well, then the water level goes down here even lower. Remember that sponge analogy I gave you? It starts to shrink, and eventually there's nothing supporting this land right here, and we get a sinkhole. That's what's forming the sinkholes, okay? This was a sinkhole, if I'm not mistaken, in Japan. This was, I forget what this one was. So, sinkholes are a big problem in Central Florida. You're gonna see a picture of all the sinkholes in Florida in just a minute. Because what are they regrowing a lot of in Florida? Look at our license plate. We have a lot of orange groves. So it made sense to go ahead and get the water from the aquifer and to take care of watering our orange groves. Now, don't get me wrong, that's a huge industry for Florida. We need our orange groves up and running. Problem is that we were sucking up so much water that the aquifers are getting lower and lower. And remember, if our fresh water in the aquifers get below the saltwater level of the ocean, then that saltwater level is going to come in and mix with the fresh water in the aquifer, and then we have a big problem because now our freshwater aquifer is no longer fresh, and that aquifer that feeds not only the state of Florida, a good section of Georgia, and I want to say a section of Alabama, is no longer fresh water, it's now salt water. Can't have that. So, because there was so much farming of orange groves in Central Florida, that's why there's more of a incident of sinkholes in Central Florida. So, irrigation, primary source of this water is the aquifers. You take water out faster than it can replenish, you end up with sinkholes. If the water is not there to dissolve the salts, they accumulate in the soil, making it unlivable for some of the plants. One of the things that they're trying to get farmers to switch over to is what they call a drip system. So you've probably seen like a ginormous sprinkler. If you've ever driven past like a farm, it's got like this big old round sprinkler and it just does a ginormous circle around itself, and it drops water onto the crops below it, right? Unfortunately, it's not very efficient as a sprinkling system at all, because you're losing a lot of water to evaporation. It's falling on the entire plant when we know the only part of the plant that can suck up the water is the root system. So you're losing a whole heck of a lot of water. So what they're actually started realizing was this drip system was way better. So they have these pipes going along all the farmland, and it literally releases just a drip of water at a time, so that the water is going straight into the soil to feed the roots. Water, that's it. That's all that needs to be done. The problem is the farmers would have to get rid of all of this system and replace it with this, which would cost them a lot of money. Slowly but surely, farmers are switching over to this system. But unfortunately, if you've driven around farmland recently, don't go right now. But if you've driven around, you've seen that there's still way more of these out there than there should be, unfortunately. But it's understandable. If you're a farmer, you don't have the money to switch over. But unfortunately, because of our freshwater supply, we really, really need that switch to happen. At the same time, as we're finding out really fast right now, we need that food to get to us. So a very, very tough catch-22 situation. Plastic tubing placed in the soil with slow release of water to prevent overwatering and salinization. Cool? All right. Here's a picture of all the sinkholes in Florida, and you're gonna notice something, right? Huge cluster right here in Central Florida. Orange Grove City, no shock there whatsoever. Not much down here in the south, right? You're gonna notice there's none in Nassau. So I always tell this story. When we were getting ready to move from Orlando, where, I mean, Lord, I remember watching the news and hearing about this entire apartment complex, whoosh, 3 or 4 stories high, falling straight into a sinkhole. I mean, the whole building, boom. You could barely see like half of the last story sticking up above the sinkhole. So when we were moving to Nassau, we were talking about buying a house 15 years ago. My husband and I were like, okay, whoa. Before we buy a house, we're gonna find out if there's any sinkholes around here, right? So I did the research. There's no sinkholes in Nassau County. Yay! And then over the years, teaching biology, right? And I'm very proudly saying that there's no sinkholes in Nassau County. And this one young man goes, yeah, right. And I was like, what do you mean, yeah, right? I've done the research. He goes, you funny. I work for my dad. There's sinkholes. They're just in the woods. And I went, what? He was right. He brought me the data. And there are sinkholes in Nassau County. They're just, so don't freak out. But they're in the woods where there's a lot of trees being cut down, and that's impacting the soil system situation there. And there's been no actual insurance claim. That's why it's showing Nassau County as no sinkholes, because there's been no insurance claims, because it's been nobody's homes, because it's back in the woods where the trees are. It's like there's nothing. No homes, no buildings, no nothing. So, this, first of all, is, I don't have the date on there, but good Lord, I found that map a good 6 years ago, I'd say. So it's already 6 years old, and that's just based on the reported insurance claims. So keep that in mind. All right, so there's probably more than that, but it kind of makes us realize the state of our aquifer. Now, we're getting better about things, more water conservation oriented. This right here is why they tell us don't overwater your lawns. That's why they have all those rules in place. And our water level's coming back up. So we're in better shape than we probably were a few years ago. But it's something we have to constantly keep an eye out because of our aquifer situation. We need that fresh water. We need to make sure we don't have sinkholes. All right? So, 5 more slides. Fertilization. It's needed as produced as processed, not where it's grown. What do we mean by processed? Okay. So, we've got some bananas, for example, that are grown in South America. We have some vegetables that are grown in California. Obviously, we live here in Nassau, Florida, right? So, they're grown in California, but they're consumed here in Florida. They are processed, i.e. digested, and pooped out here in Florida. That for those nitrates, those phosphates, they are not pooped back onto the land that they were grown in. That's what they're saying, okay? So because of that, we need to put new fertilizer in California because the plants are sucking them up, putting them into the fruits or the vegetables, and then they're shipped over here and they're not replenished. That's why we're having to refertilize the cropland. However, same with the sugarcane situation we had down South Florida, which eventually, possibly, depending on who you talk to, led to the red tide in South Florida, and we'll have to stay. So that's why we have to keep adding nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. But you have to do it in a very specific ratio. Depending on where you live, you have to do it in that particular ratio. That's why it's important to find it out. If you do it too high, you're gonna have a overnutrification that's going to occur, and eutrophication situation is going to occur. You're going to have algal bloom in the water, big problem. One of the things you can do is use compost, right? Manure, fish meal, compost. It's got a biological origin, less chance of having too high of levels of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium if you use that more natural approach. You also need to adjust the soil pH. One of the things we do with the tank is make sure the pH is correct. If the pH is not correct, certain minerals can't be absorbed, certain nutrients can't be absorbed. So we have to be very careful. We have to make sure the pH is just right. Controlling erosion, same thing. Water and wind are culprits. Rows of trees can be windbreak. So a lot of times you'll start noticing around croplands, you'll notice that they'll have some wind. Some trees set up, and it's literally to be basically a windbreaker for that cropland to prevent wind erosion. All right. Using no-till agriculture, so weeds root to left. So sometimes, like right here, you've got weeds growing up between the rows of crops. Can't talk, guys. Because that way those weeds are holding that soil in place, preventing the soil from being eroded off. And then you've got phytoremediation. We use some plants to extract the soil pollutants, and then you pull them out. We've talked about this. That was the very first unit we did in 2011. So you put the plants in there, you let them suck up any pollutants. You pull the plant, and then you dispose of the plant properly, depending on what kind of pollutants they've just extracted. You might burn them or have to dispose of them in a different way, depending on what pollutant they're sucking up. Micronutrients, nutrients you need in small amounts, macronutrients, nutrients you need in large amounts. There are 8 micronutrients: chlorine, iron, manganese, boron, zinc, copper, nickel, molybdenum, MO. That's a fun one to say. And then 6 are very much macro: carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. Those are the big ones. Obviously, potassium and calcium are also incredibly important. Now, you're gonna like this next picture. Plants can actually tell you what they're poor in. All right? Some plants. So this is a nice green, healthy plant. This plant with purple on the edges is actually telling you it's phosphate deficient. This one with this reddish orangey like that, it's actually telling you it's potassium deficient. And this one with the orangey reds in the middle instead of on the ends is nitrogen deficient. All right? I thought that was kind of cool. Start realizing that just like animals, plants can start telling you what's wrong with them based on their symptoms. You just have to learn how to read them. Epiphytes. These are plants that will grow on another plant to support themselves or nourish themselves. They'll absorb water, nutrients from rain, but and they can also from the leaves as well as the roots. So there are some exceptions to the whole no absorbing water. That doesn't mean you start watering your plants from the top. You still do the roots, because most are still doing it from the roots. Epiphytes are the only exception. You've got staghorn, Spanish moss. We're very familiar with Spanish moss. And bromeliads. Bromeliads are really pretty. Typically will produce 1 flower in their lifetime, and that's pretty much it. And of course we have parasitic plants. Absorb sugar and minerals from their host. Many species have roots that will function as historias, which are nutrient absorption productions that enter the host plant. They'll suck in and basically suck the nutrients out of them. Mistletoe, believe it or not, is actually parasitic. Indian pipe, dodder. So mistletoe, the plant that we use as romance, is actually a parasite. Last slide, carnivorous plants. So, like I said in the very beginning, these guys are photosynthetic, but they'll derive some nitrogen and other minerals by killing and digesting insects. They live where there is very little nitrogen available and have specialized leaves. So these are all leaves. We'll ignore that. That trap the actual insects. So there's your pitcher plant. This is your Venus flytrap, and this is your sundews. I don't know if I told you guys the story or not, and you know I like to tell you fun stories. So we had a chameleon, it's ginormous, ridiculously large cage. It was about this wide, this tall, and this far off the ground. For this one chameleon that was about this big. And my husband absolutely insisted on getting Venus flytrap in the bottom and put it at the very bottom. And then of course we had to feed it. And so he fed it, and Venus flytrap, crickets, and Venus flytrap closed. And then fed it again, right away, Venus flytrap. So it had the Venus flytrap had 3 leaves, so fed 3 crickets. Unfortunately, the next day the Venus flytrap died. And then we looked it up and found out that you were supposed to feed it 1 cricket a week. So by feeding it 3 crickets in 1 day, we fed it to death. So they really don't need that much more, is my whole take-home point. But yeah, these are really great to have. They're really great to catch mosquitoes. Unfortunately, they tend to die in our area. It tends to be a little too cold. But if you have issues with flies and mosquitoes, these guys are great. They attract them like crazy. They're just basically open all the time, and they release a smell that attracts the flies and mosquitoes, and they just come in and sit at the bottom and just get dissolved in this gooey mess. They're really kind of cool though. And that's it for chapter 37, you guys. Not too bad.